Hello students, here we'll discuss water pollution. We'll discuss what are the sources of water pollution, what are the types of water pollution, what are the different pollutants that are polluting water, and what are the ways in which we can treat water. So all these kind of things we will discuss. But before we do all that, we'll start with some of the data that we have with respect to water pollution in India. So a report by Central Pollution Control Board in 2015 talked about the fact that more than 61,948 million liters of urban sewage is generated on a daily basis in India. But if we talk about the cities, we just have an installed capacity of just 38% of this particular number. Not only this, in reality, more than this amount goes untreated into rivers or water bodies, as the treatment capacity of major treatment plants in all these urban centers is just around 66%. So as a result, more than 38,000 million liters of wastewater goes untreated into river bodies, into water bodies, into groundwater every day. Not only this, apart from that, you also have industrial effluents. So all that is making the situation in India very grim. In April 2015, a Central Pollution Control Board directive issued directions to all the state pollution control boards and pollution control committees for setting up of sewage treatment plants in all these states, in all their respective states, so that the untreated sewage does not enter the rivers. The same directions were also issued by the Central Pollution Control Board to all the 69 municipal corporations, authorities in all the metro cities and all the capital cities of India back in October 2015. Not only this, crores of rupees is being pumped into cleaning rivers under various programs that India has. For example, you have National River Conservation Plan, National River Conservation Plan. You have Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, or in other words called as AMRUT. You have the very famous Namami Gange plan, right? Then you have various smart cities project. So there are so many programs that are running which are trying to look into one or the other aspect of water pollution in India. Not only this, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has given more than 2,066.98 crore rupees for aiding the various projects and sewage treatment plant of capacity of more than 2,446.24 million liters per day under this National River Conservation Plan. Until March 2017, approximately 7,000 crores have been spent only for cleaning the river Ganga. And this was noted in one of the orders of National Green Tribunal. The states are also getting financial assistance not only from the Pollution Control Board, but also in form of loans and grants by various foreign agencies as well. And of course, the citizens of India have been moving to courts time and again to save rivers from water pollution. So all these kind of things we are seeing. Not only this, another fact if I have to give you, March 2017, the government of Uttarakhand declared Ganga and Yamuna as living entities. They declared the rivers Ganga and Yamuna as living entities. So they thought that this would help them conserve and rejuvenate the rivers in a faster manner. But what happened is, in July 2017, the Supreme Court reversed this order, talking about the legal and administrative ramifications that it would have. So all these kind of things we have been seeing with the case of water pollution and associated areas in India. We'll come back to the state of rivers, etc. again, but before that we'll discuss what is water pollution and some of the basics related to water pollution. Now, we all know that water is essential for everyone's survival. Whether you talk about the domestic use, you talk about agriculture, you discuss fisheries, tourism, industrial use, everywhere water is very, very essential. But what's happening is, with increasing population, with urbanization, industrialization, these things have led to the decrease of availability of water. And when I say availability of water, we are discussing fresh water. Why fresh water? Because on the earth we know that approximately 75% of the earth is just water. But out of this 75%, 97% of the water on earth is present in seas and oceans. The remaining 3% is fresh water. But problem is, in this 3% also, 75% is locked under polar ice caps and glaciers, and basically also in quite deep, and also under the earth's surface as underground water. So the amount of water that is usable, that can be used for domestic purpose, for agriculture, in industries, is very, very less. And this fresh water comes basically from two sources. One, surface water, and the second is groundwater. So what do we mean by surface water and what do we mean by groundwater? Now, whenever precipitation happens, rain, snow, etc., they are sources of natural fresh water, you can say. Now, approximately 1/3 of it basically is absorbed by plants and animals. There is 1/3 which goes inside the soil and rocks. And then you have the other 1/3 which runs off into rivers and other water bodies. So this, the third 1/3 which we are discussing, which runs off into streams, into rivers, into lakes, this is called as surface water. Now, very small fraction of usable surface water is continuously replenished by the means of hydrological cycle. What is hydrological cycle? We discussed this part, that there will be evaporation of water from oceans, from rivers and other sources, and this will form the clouds. When the clouds get saturated, precipitation will happen, and then the water will fall back into the ground. On the surface, the water runs into the rivers and finally to the oceans, and this cycle continues, and this is called as hydrological cycle. So the surface water has a natural tendency to clean itself also with certain kinds of organisms or microorganisms that we have, which break down the pollutants into harmless substances. So this carries on with the surface water. The other kind that we have is groundwater. So what is groundwater? It is this part, this 1/3 which seeps into the ground as a result of gravity and fills up these pores or the gaps between rocks and soils where the water accumulates, is called as aquifers. Now, groundwater in the form of wells and spring is often the only source of water that the small towns and villages in India have. In spite of a good number of water resources that we have, there is a shortage of usable water. And this is actually increasing due to population increase, urbanization and industrialization. So there is a need to optimize the use of water, conserve the water, and use the various ways in which water can be harvested. For example, you have the process of rainwater harvesting, correct? Apart from that, we can also talk about groundwater conservation, and also recycling of water can be done. So via all these methods, we can try and conserve groundwater. Now, once we know that these are the sources of water that we have for fresh water, now we'll come to pollution and we'll try to define what is pollution. So you all know that a large amount of water is discharged back after domestic and industrial usage, right? And this contamination with domestic waste and industrial effluents carries on to all the water bodies. Now, when this contamination reaches beyond a certain allowed concentration level, we can call this as water pollution. And the contaminants which are present with this kind of contamination can be called as pollutants, right? So water pollution in that way can be defined as the contamination of all the water bodies like streams, lakes, seas, oceans, rivers, etc., which can be harmful for any living being, be it humans, be it animals, be it plants. So if the concentration of substances which are naturally present in water increases, then also we can say that water is polluted. So when we talk about the pollutants that are present in water, we take into account certain parameters based on which we define that, okay, the water in this particular area or in this region is polluted. So what are these parameters? We have three parameters: physical parameters, chemical parameters, and biological parameters. Physical, chemical, and biological basically related to physics, chemistry, and biology of water. So what are physical parameters? You can talk about taste, color, odor, turbidity, electrical conductivity. So if there is an undesirable change in any one of these kind of parameters, then in that case we can say that water is polluted. Apart from that, what are the chemical parameters? Let's say a water body that we are discussing has certain contamination or chemical contamination. Like it can have carbonates, it can have sulfates, it can have certain metals. So if something like this, something which is a chemical is present in the water and is undesirable for the kind of water, even let's say you talk about chlorides, very famous for contaminating water, fluorides in many regions in India. So all these which are dissolved in water can cause water pollution. Apart from that, you have biological parameters. What are biological parameters? When there is an organism which is present in water which can cause contamination of water leading to pollution of water, can be called as biological parameters. So there can be certain kinds of bacteria, virus, fungi, algal growth. So all these would be called as biological parameters which are contaminating water. So physical parameters, you can just see color of a river has changed. You can say that yes, the water is most probably polluted. But biological parameters are the most important ones because they give an indirect indication of amount of pollution in water, because they can infect the kinds of lives that exist in water. They can affect the plants, they can affect the animals, other organisms which are present in water. The amount or the number of animals and plants in the aquatic life can start to decrease, which can cause a problem in the entire biodiversity of the region. So that's why biological parameters are the most important ones when considered water pollution. Now, what are the sources of water pollution? We can define freshwater pollution in two manners. One, surface water pollution and groundwater pollution. So we'll discuss both surface water pollution and groundwater pollution one by one. First, let's start with surface water pollution. So when a pollutant enters a stream, river or lake, this gives rise to surface water pollution. And what is surface water, what is groundwater, we have already discussed, so this should not be an issue. Surface water pollution has a number of sources. One way of defining the sources can be point and non-point sources. So what are point sources? When your source is well defined. It can be domestic, it can be industrial, but if the source is very well defined, we call it as a point source. So all the domestic and industrial waste are examples of point sources. Then you have non-point sources. What are non-point sources? Sources which cannot be effectively checked because they would be very scattered and spread all throughout and would cause water pollution from various ways. So those kind of sources can be called as non-point sources. So this type of sources deliver pollutants indirectly through environmental changes and account for majority of the contamination in all the streams and lakes. For example, if we talk about the water that runs off from agricultural farms, or let's say from construction sites, from abandoned mines, from all these sources and enter the streams, lakes or rivers, would be called as non-point source. So it is a very difficult kind of source to control the pollution from. Point sources are easier to control. Then after that you can have natural and anthropogenic sources. And as the name itself suggests, something which is natural source can be called as natural, and anthropogenic, something which is caused due to human intervention. Natural sources may include contaminated soil, minerals, etc., which are in and around a river body or a stream, lake, etc. Then on the other hand, you have human intervention and human activities that is causing pollution. and that's why it has been termed as anthropogenic sources. For example, if we talk about sewage or industrial waste, these are anthropogenic sources. Then the next source of water is groundwater pollution. Now, when the polluted water seeps into the ground and enters aquifers, it results into groundwater pollution. Now, most of our villages and many of the townships, groundwater is the only source of drinking water. That's why pollution of groundwater is a matter of serious concern. Groundwater gets polluted in a number of ways. It can be through dumping of raw sewage on soil. It can be through septic tanks. It can be through, let's say, seepage pits. So all these can be a form or a source of groundwater pollution. So the porous layers of the soil hold back the soil particles while the liquid is allowed to pass through, right? And the soluble pollutants are mixed with the groundwater, and this causes contamination of groundwater. In addition to these, excessive use of nitrogen related fertilizers, then the release of toxic waste and even some carcinogenic substances by industrial units may result in increase in groundwater pollution. And this kind of problem actually is very, very serious in areas where the groundwater table is very high, where the groundwater table is near the surface of the earth. So the groundwater can move over large distances by the virtue of the fact that large empty spaces are available below Earth's surface. So in this way, if some impurities seep into groundwater at, let's say, one point, they may be observed at a different point because they would have moved from groundwater from one point of source to the point of destination. So that's why in such cases it is very, very difficult to estimate the source of water pollution. But suspended impurities and bacterial contamination are removed in the process of seepage by the soil, acting as an absorbent or a filter, and the water which acts as a solvent. But since the movement of groundwater through the porous rocks is very slow, the pollutants which get mixed with the groundwater are not rapidly diluted. Furthermore, what happens is the groundwater does not have access to air, and therefore the oxidation of pollutants into harmless products is also not very much possible. And if you have a look at this particular picture, so here we are talking about some of the new threats to groundwater pollution, and here a sampling of the groundwater in Punjab was done, and this was published by Center for Science and Environment. So Center for Science and Environment, they talked about the new threats that groundwater pollution is seeing. So in Punjab's groundwater samples, 8 out of 10 contaminants are new contaminants. For example, you have manganese. What can be the health effect? Toxicity to the nervous system, producing a syndrome that resembles Parkinson's. And the top states with contaminated habitations are West Bengal, Assam, and Andhra Pradesh. Similarly, they have discussed copper, aluminium, mercury. Remember that mercury is very, very important. Uranium will be very, very important. Lead will be very important. And apart from that, so remember the data that has been given for these three elements. Apart from that, manganese is the fourth one, which should be very, very important. So what we saw was the various ways in which, or the various sources from where the pollutants enter the water bodies. Now, what are the types of pollutants that are contaminating the environment? First of all, we have the domestic and municipal waste. Also, you can call it as sewage. Then we have the industrial pollutants. We have the agricultural pollutants. And finally, we have the radioactive and thermal pollutants. So the first one is domestic and municipal waste. So basically, the keyword as we discussed is sewage. So the sewage contains garbage, soaps, detergents, waste food, human excreta, and is the single largest source of water pollution. Then pathogenic, or you can say disease causing microorganisms that enter the water system through sewage make it infected. And because of that infection, there is a possibility of diseases like typhoid or cholera or even dysentery in cases. when you drink this contaminated water. Apart from that, now water that is polluted by sewage may carry other kinds of bacteria and virus as well, which do not reproduce by themselves but reproduce in the cells of host organisms. So they cause a number of diseases, polio, viral hepatitis, and these are the ones which are resistant to organic matter, and these are the ones which demand a lot of oxygen, and that's why they may be responsible for deoxygenation of water bodies. That and because of this deoxygenation of water bodies in the aquatic life, we may face certain issues. Apart from this, there are other ingredients which enter various water bodies, like the plant nutrients such as nitrates and phosphates. They support the growth of algae, which is commonly called as algal bloom, and this is the blue-green species of algae. So, and this process is very famously known as eutrophication. Then the second one that we have is industrial pollutants. So many industries are located near rivers or freshwater streams, and these are responsible for discharging their untreated effluents into rivers, like toxic heavy metals such as chromium, arsenic, lead, mercury, etc., along with hazardous organic and inorganic waste such as acids, different alkalis, chlorides, cyanides, etc. So the factories which are manufacturing plastics, caustic soda, and some fungicides and pesticides, they release mercury into the water bodies along with some other effluents in the nearby water body. Now mercury enters food chain through bacteria, through algae, some fish, into the human body, and this is when toxicity of mercury becomes very evident. Now this high concentration of mercury in the water bodies or in the tissues of fishes basically happens because of formation of monomethyl mercury and dimethyl mercury, which basically gets generated due to the action of anaerobic bacteria. So this is about industrial pollutants. Then we have the agricultural waste. So manures, fertilizers, pesticides, waste from farms, slaughterhouse, poultry farms, salts, silt are basically drained as runoff from agricultural land. Now, the water body that receives large quantities of fertilizers in form of phosphates or nitrates, or even in form of manures, they become rich in nutrients, which leads to eutrophication. And also the consumption of water that is rich in nitrates is bad for human health, especially for small children. Also the pesticides such as DDT, aldrin, etc., which are used to kill the insects and rodents, etc., these pesticide residue also enters the human body through the drinking water or through the food chain, and something which is called as biomagnification, right? So these compounds have low solubility in water and they are highly soluble in fats. For example, the concentration of DDT in river water may be very low, but some fish over a period of time accumulate so much of DDT that they become unfit for human consumption. The use of pesticides in our country, we know that is increasing very rapidly. So some of these chemicals which are highly toxic become metabolized by animals that graze on fields. Therefore, these poisonous chemicals have often been observed in the human chain or human food chain as well. The presence of these chemicals in humans, even in very minute amounts, can cause hormonal imbalance, may also lead to even cancer. So this is about the agricultural waste. Then the next one that we have are the physical pollutants. So what are physical pollutants? They also may be of different kinds. One, all the radioactive wastes, the thermal sources, and the sediments. Now, water has some amount of radium and potassium 40. These basically are radioisotopes that originate from natural sources such as leaching of minerals, etc. The water bodies are also polluted by accidental leakage from the waste material or from uranium, let's say thorium mines, nuclear power plants, industries, even research laboratories, hospitals. So all these are the areas where radioisotopes are used. So radioactive material may enter the human body through the food, through water, etc., and they can accumulate in the blood and certain vital organs, and that's when they can cause tumors and can lead to cancer. Then we have the thermal sources. So various industries, nuclear power plants, thermal power plants, they require water for cooling, and the resultant, there is a hot water. So this hot water is often discharged into the rivers and lakes. Now this results in thermal pollution, and this leads to the imbalance in the ecology of water body, because higher temperature leads to lower amount of dissolved oxygen, which is very essential for marine life. So the fish and other aquatic animals can get affected by a sudden change in temperature of water. Then you have the sediments. So the soil particles which are, let's say, carried by streams, lakes, even the oceans, they form the sediments. So the sediments become polluting due to their large amounts. For example, soil erosion. What happens during soil erosion is that soil is carried by the flood water from the cropland, and that is basically responsible for sedimentation. The sedimentation may damage the water body by introducing large amount of nutrient matter. So that's why even the sediments can be polluting. Then we have the petroleum products. So petroleum products are widely used for fuel, for lubrication, plastics manufacturing, etc., and happen to be poisonous in nature. Then crude oil and other related products generally get into water by accidental spillage from ships, from tankers, from pipelines, etc. Besides these accidental spills, oil refineries, oil exploration sites, and automobile service centers also pollute different water bodies. Then also we can talk about oil slick, which floats on the water surface, causes deaths of marine life, and severely affects the ecosystem of the ocean. So this is the kind of pollution that happens from the petroleum products. Now let us discuss some of the biological effects of pollution that we see, and here we'll discuss three important terms which is very important from your prelims point of view. First of it is eutrophication. Now eutrophication is the process by which a water body slowly becomes rich in plant nutrient such as nitrates and phosphates due to soil erosion and runoff from surrounding land. So if you have a look at this particular picture, the nitrogen and phosphorus related fertilizers, they are mixing with the water bodies, and apart from that, the sediments from the land block the sunlight, and over a period of time algal bloom will be seen, which will give this kind of appearance to the water body. Now what happens is, a water system like a lake or a river reservoir may get large inflow of organic matter from domestic waste and runoff from the surrounding land. And with increasing population, intensive agriculture, and rapid industrial growth, these things have led to an increased release of domestic waste, agricultural waste, industrial waste, all these kind of waste into the water bodies. So the nutrients are released from these organic wastes by aerobic bacteria. So the nutrients are released from organic waste by the aerobic bacteria. And once they are released by the aerobic bacteria, these nutrients start to accumulate. Now, dissolved oxygen that is consumed in this process basically reduces the amount of oxygen which is present for the aquatic animals and plants which are present there. So as more and more organic matters enters the water body, more is the deoxygenation of the water body, larger is the production of nutrients, and these nutrients fertilize an abnormal growth of algae and other such water plants, such as, another example is duckweed. Now as more plants grow, some of them die also because of larger oxygen demand, and therefore the oxygen deficiency in water body, that is deoxygenation of the water body, takes place. So such a water body is basically said to be eutrophied, and that's why the process is called as eutrophication. Then the next biological effect that we need to discuss is biological oxygen demand. So what is biological oxygen demand? The quantity of oxygen used up by microorganisms at room temperature and in darkness during a specified time in breaking down organic waste in water body is called as biological oxygen demand. So what happens is, there are many organic compounds or wastes which are present in the water body. The microorganisms which are present in the system, they act upon these wastes from their own consumption and growth. Now, in the process, the metabolic activity requires oxygen, and this demand of oxygen is met by the dissolved oxygen which is present in water. Now, it is this amount of oxygen which is defined as biological oxygen demand. So, the biological oxygen demand value of an aquatic system depends basically on a few factors. First of all, the type of organic waste that we have, the amount of organic waste that we have. So, first you can say type and amount of organic waste, right? Apart from that, the nature of organisms that are working on that organic waste. Then it could also depend on the temperature of water, and it can also depend on the pH of water. So greater is the amount of organic waste in the water body, greater will be the amount of oxygen which will be required to break down these organic material biologically, and therefore the value of biological oxygen demand will be higher. So basically you can say this value actually becomes a very good measure of evaluating the degree of pollution in water body. If the biological oxygen demand is more, it means that the pollution in the water is also more. So that's why this value is used as a criteria for managing water pollution of a given water body. So an evaluation is made by determining the oxygen concentration in the water before and after the incubation period at a specified, maybe we can take, let's say, 5 days as a specified time, and it can be 20 degrees Celsius or 27 degrees Celsius as the specified temperature. So this is what is biological oxygen demand. Then after that you have the third biological effect, which is biomagnification. So a variety of chemicals also move through the food chain, right? So what may happen is many toxic pesticides, etc., may be sprayed to control the growth of fungi, the pests, etc., but they concentrate in the food chain and they harm others as well. So for example, if you talk about DDT, so DDT is sprayed to control the mosquitoes, and the concentration is expected to be very harmless to all the non-target organisms. For example, you can talk about the fish, the bird, etc. But DDT accumulates in the marshes and the planktons. Now the planktons are eaten by the fish, and the fish now have a higher concentration of DDT. So the original amount of DDT in the fish will be low, but since these planktons are being eaten by the fish, DDT now is being accumulated in the fish as well. Now there is an increased amount of concentration of toxic chemicals as you start to go higher up the food chain, and this is termed as biomagnification. So the increase in concentration of accumulated toxic chemicals as one goes higher in the food chain is called as biomagnification. So if you look at this, from water to algae, from algae to algae eating insects, from there to insect eating insects, from there it goes to the fish, from fish it goes to the bigger fish, and from there it is coming to the humans, and in this way biomagnification is acting. So a small amount of DDT which originates from here may go as up to the humans, because humans are directly consuming fish and they are also consuming other organisms which have DDT. Plus, as we discussed, that it was supposed to be harmless. DDT direct consumption for a human in very, very trace amounts would be harmless, but this trace amount is coming from various sources altogether. and that is the reason why there will be a biomagnification in humans of DDT. So this is the third term that we were discussing. Now let us discuss some of the health aspects related to groundwater contamination. So if you look at these are the 5 or 6 most important pollutants that are found, and what kind of effects they can have on humans has been listed out here. I would suggest you that you pause the lecture for a couple of minutes and have a look at all these effects. Let's have a look at some of the control measures that we can use for municipal waste. Now, wastewater that is generated by household activity, industrial or garbage landfills is called as sewage, right? And this sewage is something which is classified as municipal water pollution. Now, sewage can have dissolved organic matter also. Sewage can have some suspended colloidal particles as well. And sewage is one of the major causes of waterborne diseases, and therefore the treatment actually becomes very, very important. Now, for a very long time, the treatment of municipal waste basically involved just the removal of suspended solids or oxygen demanding materials or the harmful bacteria. That's it. But now the disposal of solid residue from the sewage has been improved by applying the municipal processes altogether. So the treatment of this wastewater is carried out in 3 stages: primary, secondary and tertiary treatment. So what is primary treatment, what is secondary treatment and what is tertiary treatment is what we are going to see. So when I say primary treatment when the water waste is to be dumped off into a river or a flowing stream, the treatment is carried out by sedimentation, coagulation and filtration. These are the 3 steps involved in the primary treatment. So the first step is sedimentation. So in sedimentation, in this step, what happens is, in large tanks specially built for this purpose, the polluted water is allowed to settle so that the silt, clay and other matter settle to the bottom and the water is slowly allowed to move out. The fine particles do not settle and thus are required to be removed in the next step. And what is the next step? The next step is coagulation. So in coagulation, the fine particles and the colloidal suspensions are combined into a large particle by a process called as coagulation. In this step is carried out by addition of special chemicals called as coagulants such as potash alum. So one example of coagulant is potash alum. The large particles either settle to the bottom or are moved into the next step. So what is the next step? The next step is filtration. So in filtration, the suspended particles, the flocculants, bacteria and other organisms are filtered by passing the water through a bed of sand or finely divided coal or through some fibrous material. The total impurities collected in these steps are called as sludge, and this sludge is used as a very valuable fertilizer. So on composting, it releases sludge gas and it consists mainly of methane gas, which is used for cooking purpose. So what is composting? Composting is the action of anaerobic bacteria. So this releases the sludge gas, and this sludge gas mainly contains methane, and this methane can be used for cooking purposes. Now the next kind of treatment is secondary, or sometimes called as biological treatment. So the water after primary treatment is not fit for drinking purpose and has to undergo further treatment. This is done through the secondary treatment or secondary or biological treatment. So a commonly used method is to allow the polluted water to spread over a large bed of stones and gravel so that the growth of different microorganisms needing nutrients and oxygen is encouraged. Over a period of time, a fast moving food chain is set up. So for example, the bacteria consume organic matter from the polluted water. Then the protozoa live on bacteria. So every form of organism, including bacteria and fungi and algae, help in the cleaning up process. So this is called as the secondary treatment. Now secondary treatment also has some processes. So the first process is softening. So what happens in softening is that undesirable cations of calcium and magnesium are removed from hard waters. So basically this is removal of cations of calcium and magnesium, and because what will happen is these calcium and magnesium ions will convert into carbonates or is passed through cation exchanges. This makes water soft. So basically removal of calcium and magnesium. Why? Because these are the two ions which make soft water hard. This is the first process. Then the second process is aeration. What is aeration? Simply putting it, in this process what will happen is the soft water is exposed to air, or you can say a large amount of oxygen. So that huge amount of oxygen is now available with water. This would encourage the bacteria to decompose the organic matter into harmless products such as carbon dioxide and water. So the addition of oxygen reduces carbon dioxide, sulfide, etc. The water is yet not fit for drinking purpose. The pathogenic and other microorganisms need to be killed, and this is done in the next treatment, which is the tertiary treatment. So tertiary treatment, the key word for tertiary treatment is disinfection. Disinfection is the key word for tertiary treatment. So chlorine is the most commonly used disinfectant for killing bacteria. However, chlorine also reacts with traces of organic matter present in water and forms undesirable chlorinated hydrocarbons, which can be toxic and potentially carcinogenic as well. Now, it is therefore desirable to reduce the organic matter in water before passing the chlorine gas. This is basically the tertiary treatment. There are other ways of tertiary treatment as well. For example, reverse osmosis can be used, ultraviolet radiation can be used, ozone gas treatment can be used. So all these can also be performed, but the problem is most of these are expensive processes. So that's why they are not generally used. So in a treatment plant, what happens is the waste is passed through a series of screens, chambers and chemical processes to reduce the bulk and toxicity. During the primary treatment, a large percentage of suspended solids and inorganic matter would be removed from sewage. Then comes the secondary stage. In the secondary stage, the reduction of organic material by acceleration of natural biological processes will happen by addition of oxygen. Then you have the tertiary treatment. It is done when the water is to be reused. So here 99% of the solids are already removed, and the various chemical processes are used to ensure that the water is free from infecting material. So if you just have a look at this particular diagram, you would understand what is primary, secondary and tertiary treatment. First of all, the sewage goes to the primary settling tank. Here what will happen is that the solid sewage will come out of the process, and this part will move on to the next process. Then here comes the secondary part, and as you see, you have the air compressor here. From here it will move on to the tertiary part, and that's why there is the addition of chlorine as we talked about it. And then finally you have water which is ready for reuse. So this is how the entire process of primary, secondary and tertiary process happens.